This week on the Crisis Conflict Emergency Management Podcast.
I would say that human nature makes all of us risk averse, right? We're not risk taking by nature. So it's we like our comfort zone, we like to eat. We like to eat different food, but provided they are all from the same traditional sources, right? So moving forward, what we are seeing is that there is a monoculture of the traditional food crops. It's not really sustainable because they have all these environmental impact and the soil degradation, all these problems.
Welcome to the Crisis, Conflict, and Emergency Management Podcast, where we have global conversations and share perspectives about international crisis, preparedness, and how to build more resilient societies. My name is Kyle, and I will be your host. And just how vulnerable are we to the changing international environment, and what can we learn from this experience? From AI to space warfare to community development and crisis communications, there's something here for everyone. Join us for unique international conversations and perspectives into the current threats, challenges, and risks to our society. This podcast is brought to you by Capacity Building International and sponsored by the International Emergency Management Society. Okay, today we are talking with Professor William Chen, who is the Michael Pham Endowed Chair Professor and Director of Food Science and Technology Program at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Professor William Chen and his interdisciplinary team have developed various food technology platforms towards zero-waste food circular economy, and these have resulted in his active joint research and development with food industry, leading to the successful commercialization of a number of his innovations. He is also actively engaged in various government efforts in enhancing food security, and he is a director of Singapore Agrifood Innovation Lab, co-director of the NTU Future Ready Food Safety Hub, and director of the Food Industry Joint Innovation Lab. Now, Professor Chen is an advisor and consultant to many different government agencies, the World Health Organization, the Asian Development Bank, and the Good Food Institute, APAC, food industry, and overseas universities, including University of Florida, on matters related to food technology and food security. And in 2019, the Going Green program by CNN described Professor Chen as a game-changing leader in the green revolution of the food system. Professor Chen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, Mr. King. Thank you so much for reaching out and having me on the program. It's a true honor to be with you.
Well, thanks for joining us. I think this is going to be a very interesting discussion. But before we get started, maybe give us some insights into how you got started in the field of food safety and food security, and then what brought you into this sort of niche area that you're working in today.
Well, as we all know, Singapore is a very small city-state with almost zero natural resources. So we rely heavily on import and supply chain, including food. And as we are seeing the impact of a lot of external factors that include climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic, and now the war in Ukraine, all these have a very, very direct impact, first on the food production, second on the supply chain. And so for a small country like Singapore, enhancing the food security is existential priority. So much so, very similar to water security, which we have developed this new technology called New Water. And in the food space, so what we are looking at is actually how to develop innovations and translate into solutions to sort of build an efficient food system, which would sort of highlight on the or sort of focus more on the quality of the food to be produced rather than on the quantity, because we're a small island. There is a need to enhance local farming capabilities, even though we have less than 1% of land for farming, but we can rely on technology to push for vertical farming. That's one example. So urban farming is one of the very few choices we have in Singapore. The second one is processing technology. As we know, the traditional food system is operating in a linear form, which means we generate a lot of waste. And this is not just for Singapore, for the whole world. It will not be sustainable, because with growing, increasing world population, the demand for food will increase. But if we rely on the current food system, there's no way we can sustain the food production. So we are actually developing innovations to enhance the processing technology and reduce food waste. So this become a part and parcel of this food system, a circular system. The third aspect we're looking at is how to produce food that adapt to the different layer of society. In the context of Singapore, we have a very fast aging population. So how to produce food that is acceptable by elderly in Singapore, but worldwide we are talking about novel food, alternative food, how to get consumer acceptance about this alternative novel food. That's another issue we need to tackle.
Oh, that's interesting. Can you go into that a little bit more for the uninitiated like myself? So when you're talking about the circular process for food and what are we talking about really from the generating food to food waste and things like that? What are we describing here?
So this, for example, if we talk about the farming, right? The farming side, so traditionally we have this farmland, industrial farm side, farmland, which is usually they are located far away from the urban area. Yeah. So then you have this first layer of the food waste. In fact, it's a food loss. That is a post-harvest, right? So that involves this transportation, storage. That generally, I think anything around 30% of agriculture produce is lost before you even reach the processing site. And then from there, processing will have some side streams like soybean residues, barley spent grain. All these we call it processing side stream. These are the waste that cannot be managed by consumers because the consumer they are really at the very far end of the retail chain. But at the consumer side, we also have these consumer generator food waste, right? Like restaurant or household. So that's another type of food waste. All in, we're talking about the easily 30 to 40% of food produced go to the waste. So if we can plug a hole, this food waste hole and the whole of this food waste, in fact, there's a estimate by Food and Agriculture Organization under the UN that if we can, the worldwide, not just Singapore, Singapore is a little bit too small. Worldwide, if we can achieve zero food waste, then there's actually no need to introduce GM crops, all these kind of things. So there's a way to actually enhance food production without demanding more land to this. So when we talk about circular economy, it's really about integrating all these different elements together. So from production to processing and to consumer, there's very little or zero waste generated. Of course, this is the ideal situation, but from the current 30 to 40% down to I think below 10%, this is actually more realistic than really push for zero waste. But zero waste is more like a aspiration rather than a expectation. Yeah. So if we talk about circular economy, what does it really mean in the food space? So take an example of processing side stream like soybean residue in Asia. In Singapore, we generate every year about 20 over thousand tons of soybean residue a year. So what do people do usually? There are no animal farm. We only have two chicken farms in Singapore. So they either send for incineration and then after that landfill, or they ship to Malaysia for animal feed. So we at my university, our team we have developed this innovation to use simple technology. The something good about food technology is that you don't have to you don't need rocket science. You can actually, it's very interdisciplinary, very easy to implement the technology. See, in this case about soybean residue, we use actually fermentation, which is very everybody knows about fermentation, right? So the idea of applying fermentation is to take a nutrient out of the soybean residue, right? Then after that, of course, the fermentation will not be able to remove all the soybean residue because that would be too easy, right? There's still a substantial 40 to 50% of the residue, solid residue that remains. So what we have done after that is we develop cellulose extraction technology to convert this solid residue into packaging materials. Yeah. So as a whole, you can see this zero waste processing. Then you may ask, what do you do with this nutrient recover? if we don't do anything about it, it's another form of waste, which defeat the purpose, right? So what we have done is a number of applications reconnect back to the food chain. Example one, when we talk about urban farming, that we don't obviously we can't grow all the crops indoor and or underground, right? So we select a species which are suitable for urban farming. One example is microalgae. So there are a lot of protein-rich species of microalgae, but if we grow in the city, everything is expensive. Electricity, setup, infrastructure setup. So the idea here is to look at all the possible corners and bring in technology to lower the cost. So in this case, culture medium of a microalgae, the commercial culture medium is not expensive, but if you talk about scale up production level, it will be expensive. So what we have done is that replace the microalgae culture medium with our fermented soybean residue. And interestingly, the microalgae grow 3 times faster and the cost is 3 times less. So achieve 9 times improvement. This is just an example to show that there are ways to apply this food waste valorization into the urban farming. Another example, even more exciting, is that when we talk about cultivated meat, the new kid, on the block for the alternative food, everybody is excited, but everybody is also stuck in reality because the fetal bovine serum is so expensive. We're talking about $2,000 US dollar per liter, and then if we rely on this fetal bovine serum, we are not moving away from animal farming because you still need the calf to get the serum. So what we have demonstrated is that this fetal bovine serum can be replaced by the fermented okra, fermented soybean residue. Again, this bring down the cost from 2,000 to $2 a liter. This is a tremendous improvement in cost cutting, and also make this cultivated meat industry more sustainable because we really are moving away from the animal farming. Yeah. Moving the next level up to the value chain in the next level is that this we have demonstrated that the protein proportion of this fermented barley, for example, barley spent grain, right? Is we can extract the protein portion and then replace the egg yolk in the mayonnaise because they have this emulsifying function. So we have produced this brand new plant-based mayonnaise, which tastes. Not I say that I'm not the one. I'm not the one here to promote the product, but journalists they did a blind test, right? And then they say it tastes different but fragrant, so tastes equally good, right? Than the commercial mayonnaise. So you may ask, then what do you do with the rest? Well, we have a packaging material, we have integration of the nutrient recover from the fermentation, valorization. So you can see this is how we build this circular economy. The waste become not a waste, but part and parcel of this food system. Yeah, this is some real example developed by NTU, by my university, and we are all these innovations are being commercialized through our partnership with the food industry.
Well, that's really interesting. Thank you for those examples because it really highlights the efficiency that can be achieved by just trying to refine our processes and to be able to, come up with more innovative ideas to address some of these key food insecurity issues. And when I look at
Yep.
some of the statistics, specifically like with the United States, that were saying that basically in 2020, an estimated 1 in 8 Americans were food insecure, which means that's about 38 million Americans, including almost 12 million children, were going through sort of food insecurity, meaning a lack of consistent access to enough food for an
Yep.
active or healthy lifestyle. So these efficiencies and these process can help tremendously in addressing these issues. Like you mentioned, I think the United Nations was saying if we can just solve the efficiency equation, we could solve the insecurity equation. But you also mentioned something there about acceptance and sort of social acceptance of this. What challenges have you had in terms of social acceptance for these type of topics?
I would say that human nature makes all of us risk averse, right? We're not risk taking in by nature. So is we like our comfort zone, we like to eat. I mean, we like to eat different food, but provided they are all from the same traditional sources, right? So moving forward, what we are seeing is that is a monoculture of the traditional food crops. It's not really sustainable because they have all these environmental impact and the soil degradation, all these problems. So idea here is that we, instead of I'll share one story, very interesting story with you. This is about the potato. Potato, 600-700 years ago, it used to be a indoor plant because of the beautiful flower, right? Yellow flower. If you check internet, you will find them. And then there was this food crisis in South America. Then people start looking for alternative food. Then potato, thereafter, cut the long story short, then potato become now one of the main food crops. But I don't think we should wait every time for food crisis to kick in, then we look for food, and a little bit too late, right? So proactively now people start looking for alternative food. We don't have to always grow everything in a lab, like cultivated meat, all these kind of thing. It's good, but it's not cheap. It will stay expensive for a while. If we open our eyes to look into nature, you see regionally available, but it's not part and parcel of the traditional crop farming. We talk about in Asia, in Africa, Bambara groundnut. All these are naturally available, nutritious crops, which can be alternative food sources. But the consumer acceptance is something that we need to address, because no point producing all the food, putting so much effort to produce something no one buys, right? So another example is insect protein, right? A lot of people just cannot accept that the insect can be part and parcel of the diet. But I think this is a sort of we need a lot of education. Yeah, we need the education. We need to let people. It's a collective effort to make food systems sustainable. Is actually joint responsibility. It's not just the government. It's not just the industry. Consumer must come in. Otherwise, nothing will work out. So I would say that one easy way. So I like to give real life example. It's easy to relate. One example is that I myself have tasted this insect protein blended pasta made by the Dutch in the Netherlands. It tastes equally good, you see. So consumer, when they come to novel food, the two things on their mind. One is taste, the other one is price. So there's a famous quote that says, "Taste is king, price is queen." So another way is that the consumers, when they come to novel food, they can be very fussy. First time taste no good, they will not try again. So one way to go easy to enhance consumers' confidence in novel food is actually to replace the ingredient of a currently available food with some of these alternative sources. Like just now I mentioned, the protein ingredient, you replace your insect protein. No one can tell the difference. Slowly, so it's a progressive sort of transition. And then I think that in that way, people will start to appreciate this novel food. But I think for plant-based protein, there's no difficult to convince the consumer. The main reason is that the plant-based diet is culturally, is traditionally worldwide. Everybody eats that, right? So, from sort of a mainly vegetarian type of diet, you move to protein-rich vegetarian. Then this is only a plus point there. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I think social acceptance, you're absolutely right. It's going to sort of take the lead on whether this is going to be effective or not. And I certainly hope that it does. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about, say, the future perspective here in terms of food security, food insecurity, and what it means. And when we're looking across the horizon, and I know you can't really predict the future, but if we're looking across the horizon, we're seeing things that are happening in global events today, and some of the trends and indicators that you're looking at, both as an institution, as an expert in this field. There's many things that are going on that can also be quite concerning. And one of the things that we discussed on this podcast in particular is things like the Ukraine crisis. So we're seeing a lot of global events. I mean, even from the World Food Program, they're saying 44 million people in 38 countries are teetering on the edge of famine, and overall global needs for humanitarian assistance are even higher. And then we add in the conflict in Ukraine and the impact on the food supply, global food supply. What are you seeing in terms of the horizon scanning when you're looking at these sort of issues? What are some of your thoughts here?
Well, I think first of all, when we look at the food system, I think we need to actually focus. Not see. I think we should avoid focusing on just a food product. It's the entire food value chain. So up from the farming, passing through the processing, and then the distribution and consumer end, right? And if we look at today's situation, it's getting really volatile. Uh, I would say the adaptation strategy and the mitigation strategy are very important. We ought not to rely too much on one source. You know that this is a little bit similar to Singapore's water security, because of the geography location and the nature. We can only get water from one single source. That really limit the option. In case of crisis, you never know, right? So for food, we adopt a different strategy because we tap on global supply chain. Singapore import more than 90% of food from over 160 countries. But I sensed this many years ago, but I didn't say very loudly because people say just crying wolf, right? I said there may be one day with money you cannot buy food. This is something that we are seeing now, right? I would say instead of saying the global level, which we will see too many variables, new variables, we cannot really control the global situation. One way to mitigate this crisis is perhaps to build a regional partnership. So, what I'm trying to say is that we are not saying closing doors, ASEAN stay ASEAN, Europe stay Europe, but rather you can build this sort of efficient food system from a smaller region rather than global level. And then from there, it is stretchable. It becomes stretchable because the similar technology that you use to build efficient system, a food system in your region may be tweaked to and applicable for other regions depending on the type of food and type of the consumer demand, right? So by doing so, you will have these different blocks which can be interconnected, right? So in that way, I think that can be a good one option to deal with this crisis. Why I say this is that example of when Singapore were developing urban farming, then you may ask, Singapore is so small, how far can you go, right? This is a real question. The advantage of developing urban farming, first is that more and more people will move to the city. So it's predicted about 70%, more than 70% of people will stay in the urban area by 2050. So urban farming has a future. Although it can't grow everything in the city, but this is one of the attraction. The second one is that there are a lot of mega city around Singapore, so we can work with regional partners, right? They have a different test bed to test technology innovation developed in Singapore. Then everyone benefit from it. Then we grow together. So the food system become more like cooperative rather than transaction. You don't just every time just use money to get food, but if you share technology, then I think it become much more friendly, and people tend to help each other when they are more friendly, right?
I think that's an interesting point. You know, there's that expression in disasters and emergency management where all disasters are local, and so the impact is absolutely with the communities. And in this case, you could build that model out, and you could look at it from a regional perspective on food security and stabilize your own region, and then sort of export those processes, that
Yeah,
technology, those lessons learned, and to other regions and try and create more stability in other areas as well. But I see, for example, when we look at things like the Ukraine crisis and what's happening and sort of what we're seeing in terms of global food supply, which is, I think, an important sort of piece to your point, when we talk about global markets, supply chains, and supplies, and the effect of conflict, when they're saying like there's 13.5 million tons of wheat and 16 million tons of maize or corn, basically, are frozen in the two countries, right, between Ukraine and Russia, which is
Yeah.
23 and 43%
Yeah.
of their expected exports in 2021 and 2022. So we're already, and in many locations, I can sort of vouch for this, currently where I live. I mean, you can go to the stores and you can
Yeah.
start to see that there's no sunflower oil and things like that. And we're starting to see some shortages, nothing overly dramatic, but there's a noticeable sort of shortage in some things that are coming from that specific region because of the impact of conflict on the global supply chain, like you're talking about.
Yeah. But I would also say that if we actually there's always a buffer in nature. Nature provides a lot of buffer, right? In this case, in the crop farming, I would say the silver lining is actually to really find ways to move away from livestock farming, because the crops that we grow, around 60 to 80% of the crop we grow is channeled to be animal feed, so it's not efficient. So you can see that, I mean, in the absolute number is very scary, what you just mentioned, right? The wheat production in Ukraine, in Russia. But I think this is really a wake-up call. All these crises, COVID-19, war in Ukraine, and I think they are more acute wake-up call than climate change. Because climate change, you see, is like a frog in the slow heating water pot, right? So after a while, you don't see immediate impact. But this crisis, a wake-up call to force people or policymaker to look beyond the current system and find way to improve. So in long run, I don't see it as a bad thing, because there are a lot of flaws. But if the car is running, people are lazy. They don't send to the mechanics to do regular servicing, right? It's the same thing. So here, it's not like Ukraine and Russia are the only producer of wheat, but then if you put that number in the equation of how much crops are really channeled for consumer for our dining table, very little, So if you balance out everything, there time to this is time to adjust, tighten the weak points, and then build the efficient system. I think this is a perfect timing. So I'm sorry, I'm the more like an optimistic type of a nature in nature. Yeah, so I always see opportunity in crisis. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting in terms of the overall efficiency. And I think that's one of the things that we don't really hear very often in terms of the larger discussion. Obviously, this sort of really catastrophic, conflict in Ukraine and what's happening, and then the views on food security. But we don't hear about this sort of clarification like
Yep.
you're talking about, where you say, okay, well, let's take a step back and see actually how much of that is actually going to food for the population.
Exactly, exactly. So I say another example. I mean, the because of the traditionally the food system is linear, as we mentioned earlier. So farmers, they may not predict what is a real market demand. So sometimes they overproduce, overgrow the crops. What do? They just leave it, right? So there are a lot of loss along the way, probably even higher than what we are seeing the loss due because of the war. So all this is about the how we tighten the food system. Not necessarily always look for waste valorization, but sometimes internet of things data analytic will make the system much more efficient. So really demand drive supply. So if a consumer doesn't want this thing, why do you produce every year so much, right? Likewise, you mentioned earlier, the world is suffering for many places. People have no access to food. It's a distribution problem also. It doesn't mean that there's no food. It's just like, so there are a lot of aspect of the current food system that need to be tightened. But once we build solely in let's say in the city like Singapore or in some other area around the world, there is a circular economy system. If this can be spill over to the current food production system, I think the food system will be more resilient to these external factors. Yeah.
That's interesting. And so when we talk about situations like, and Ukraine is not the only one, but when we talk about food insecurity and conflict, have you looked often in terms of what food insecurity means and that it can lead to conflict? Has that come across your research at all?
Very interesting point. Very interesting point. But Singapore, I could not do too much of a field study because we don't have farm, right? Very little farm. But I would say what you point out is a very important point. In the Southeast Asia region, for example, we have 80% of smallholder farmers. Yeah. All these climate change, rise in sea level, and supply chain disruption will make a lot of people jobless, right? So, and then these will be another source of the human movement towards where the food is, like in the city, and then that will cause a lot of constraint and pressure, increase the pressure on the food system. Then that when people have nothing to eat, then that's one of the reasons for them to start fighting, right? So is I would say when we talk about in this particular case, when we talk about future food system, it's not just about what we want to see as a tasty alternative food, but it's also should reflect back on the farming side, how we take care of the farmers' interest, livelihood. Otherwise, it's a broken system. Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting.
I think I just mentioned Southeast Asia, yeah, Southeast Asia region because I think it applied to many part of the world. You know, when the water, when you have this longer period of drought, and then the strongest tropical storms, to that affect livelihood of many farmers, and this is a serious issue actually. Yeah.
So, while food insecurity may not lead directly to a conflict, what we often see is that, like you're saying, it's a contributing factor, and so it's an issue of the
Yeah.
maybe it is climate change and it's affecting certain coastal crops or whatever the case is, but it can drive other economic factors. It can drive instability. It can drive job loss. It can drive supply chain dynamics and
Yeah.
impact on societies, and then therefore cause conflict. And even the World Bank was saying in terms of conflict, security, and development that the lack of food has been the source of many past and recent conflicts. Food insecurity has clearly been a factor behind outbreaks of social unrest or worse, and yet conflict also has induced notable instances of food insecurity, and often because of when you do have a conflict and what are they going after, what are they attacking. In the case of Ukraine, again, you'll see attacks on industrial complexes. You'll see a degradation of capabilities to produce or deliver, or even now, being able to plant crops, things like that. So there's a significant impact because of conflict on the food security, not only for that population, but it can also be a driver of instability as well. And so that's quite interesting. And so when we're looking across the future and we're seeing these things, how efficient do you think we're going to be in the next 10 years? I know you can't predict anything. It's very difficult.
Yeah, I hope so because crises are really a wake up calls for people who are positively thinking, right? And I would say one of the key elements that people may not have paid enough attention is actually on the what is defined as a minimum nutrition requirement. What is enough? We talk about how much food we need to produce, but based on what? Right? Well, what is the basis? You know, people obesity is an issue, malnutrition is an issue. So, what is actually the nutrition requirement? So, when we talk about circular food circular economy, we ought to consider what is how much minimum is needed. You know, people are overeating these days, right? Because the food is so easily available for most of the part in the world. While we talk about other part of the world, people have no access to the food. That is not because there's no food; it's a distribution issue, right? So when we talk about this available food, we don't know when to stop. Honestly, I mean, this is the education part, and then we also talk about disease, human health problem related to food. But I think if we can define clearly what the nutrition requirement is, that and then factor that back to the production system, I think we will be on the right track to have a very healthy population in the world, very better condition on environment and so on. Yeah. And then, so for all we know, a lot of this environmental impact, everybody knows, is actually because of this. We don't care about the environment, including farming, over farming, right? And then deforestation also sometimes is related to farming, right? Not sometimes it's not directly linked to farming, but like we talk about oil palm plantation, right? Right, oil palm plantation, palm oil, right, in Southeast Asia. That is clearly because of this. I would not say it's like it's just like profit-driven type of behavior. That behavior is another thing, and in the end, it backfires on us. We have all this climate change. COVID-19, I think, is part and parcel of the climate change because when you destroy the environment, you bring us, human ourselves, closer to the nature. We should be left alone, actually. Yeah.
This is all a really interesting discussion. I mean, because of the fact that you have to determine or at least revisit the what we might call the baseline. So like what is the fundamental or foundational nutrition
Yep.
elements, and then how does that drive? I mean, even and drive, food supply and chains and
Yes.
everything. And what's interesting about that, and not to get too far into the nutrition discussion, but you could even see in the evolution of the United States when we had this food pyramid and like people have really gotten away from that
Yeah.
because they're like, no, your diet needs to be full of grains and all the and carbohydrates, and people are
Yeah.
now sort of realizing that maybe that's not the best idea.
Right. 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 And I think consumers' personal preference towards a type of diet they want to have is perfectly okay, but the question is really how much is enough. I think there's this saying that the food is a medicine. So in fact, which means food determine the health condition. So if we can, nutrition status also determine how healthy we are. So if we can actually link food to the clinical nutrition, that would be something I think will help us tremendously. The whole world, is a I myself I mean I know how much I should be eating but it's like maybe it's not enough, maybe it's too much. We don't really know. We don't really know. No one really knows. Yeah.
Mm. So let's bring this down sort of like to the community level now. And so, we've talked about these larger scale issues in terms of, producing more efficient processes, distribution systems, technology, and also the larger context of social acceptance of different food sources. And if we're talking about our communities, our community leaders, state level, whatever the case it is, city, state, federal level, what are some of the things that they could be doing now in terms of having an impact and increasing food security for their own communities?
Oh, well, I would say this is a very good question. In fact, I would say, but depends on the what type of community you're talking about, right? It can be very different. The type of approach they take. Like you're talking about urban community or farming community. So I would say education is one thing. The second one is stay positive. Always have more options. Prepare the community with a mindset that always have more options. Yeah. So in fact, this new push towards alternative food, uh, it should be interpreted as providing consumers with more options. That would go a long way rather than say tomorrow we you no more beef steak, you have to eat this cultivated meat. So education is one thing. Prepare this positive mindset in the population to have to prepare for the worst, but also accept new options. Prepare for new options. I think this is some of the sort of positive mindset we can instill in people around us, rather than anything that is missing we start panicking. That would not be helpful. And I think also inject this concept of shared responsibility. That's important. Yeah.
So, well, obviously everything starts sort of on the education side, right? And so on the public education side,
Mm.
informing the public that there are alternatives, there are options that are socially acceptable, and it's completely
Yeah.
fine. But I think one thing that
Yeah.
you mentioned is
Yeah.
also very important, which is to start explaining to people the terrible efficiency in the food supply system, right? And that is not
Yeah.
a lack of food, overall. It's just that the fact that we're losing 30 and 40% of the food and just due to inefficiencies in the supply system, and that just because we're growing massive crops doesn't mean it's actually turning to food, that it's used for industrial purposes
Exactly.
or feeding animals, whatever the case is. Which that
Right.
eventually may turn into food
Right.
as well. But the overall idea is, I think that's largely to a great extent missing in most of the communities we're dealing with, unless you're really focused on the topic like you are, and then it's blatantly obvious to you that these things are happening. But I think that the education piece is going to be important, at least in my opinion, and then also to allow people to have perspective when they are looking at conflict like Ukraine, and you hear about, well, 40% of the world's exports are, going to be impacted. Okay, well, let's look into that a little bit to understand it.
Yeah, I think just to follow up on this point, I think another important part is for community, if they have some hands-on experience, they help them change the way they perceive things. When they go to restaurant, they say, oh, go to supermarket, they just pay something, they see, oh, so easy to get. But if you ask them to start practicing some kind of growing vegetable on their own, a community garden, these kind of things, then I think they will appreciate food much better. And start with a school, and so the residents and people from young, they will have this idea that actually food do not come so easily. But for farmers, that's a different ball game, because for farmers, we could actually, education also important, but it's different type of education to sort of give them a upskill type of training. So it's not just every day in day out traditional farming. There's a war, no more farming. You see, so they could adapt to different set of a job scope, and then make a living out of it. So it's not necessarily just every day just plant the seed and the harvest. Would not be a stable job anyway, because all this automation, they'll be out of job soon also. So maybe I would say perhaps learn some kind of this technology, like simple Internet of Things, apps, all these things. So this can be sort of make them more curious about outside world, and then from there pick up some simple skills, so they are always prepared for new opportunities. Because I always believe that people see some guys are always lucky, and they're not lucky because they're better prepared. I think this can be applied for many people. When they are prepared, opportunity come along, they grab it, so they become more successful. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I think if you are in a large agricultural community, I think your concerns are obviously going to be very different. So, because it's from a business model, it's going to be sort of demand-driven crops, and you want to have a large crop to be able to sell it, to be able to generate revenue and income for the community, for your family, things like that. Especially if you're a farmer, and I guess in many ways it's just having to adapt to a different business model, right? And on the reskilling, I
Yeah.
find that a pretty difficult discussion personally, because it's difficult to take people who have been doing something like farming for years and then just try and port them over to a technology job. But where you could, I think if people were creative to a certain extent, what would be interesting is, like, okay, if you're in an urban environment and you want to create these sort of community gardens and community, agricultural sort of base, it would be interesting to bring the farmers in to help you do that, right? So sort of adapting a different business model to be able to do those things. And so I think it just requires some creative application and creative solutions to be able to get around these issues overall.
The farmers technology uptaking, right? I agree with you, but I always equate this difficulty to take up new challenges. It's human nature again, right? If you look at the university professors, not everyone is so sort of creative or innovative, because they have a stable job. There's no need to push themselves so far. I think this is a question that is difficult to answer, because they have stable income unless the department closed down, right? So likewise for the farmers, unless no one buys their product.
Yeah, That's definitely, it's an interesting and complex problem. I don't think we can solve it today, but it's interesting in terms of, if you were like you were talking about the urban gardening, right? Or urban agriculture, I guess I should say, it's a better word. Um, and to maybe using that same expertise of people who are in the farming industry and larger agricultural projects, and get them reoriented to help big cities grow sort of urban agricultural products and systems. Because they're the ones, the farmers, the people that work with these things are actually are actually the ones that can really do it, and the system is sort of, they could help build that because they have the expertise. I don't know, just some ideas, but anyway, that's it's a really interesting discussion.
But I use another example that will illustrate the point that everyone will have a place in the future food system. In Singapore, as you know, we have this aquaculture industry, which I would not say booming, but it's changing in nature, because you used to have these small scale fish farmer, family based fish farmers. They use near shore farming, but because of this water condition, pollution, all these things, so their business is not really thriving. And then now we have this big boy coming to Singapore. They set up this aquaculture facility to really produce a lot of fish protein for Singapore. So I was approached last 2 weeks by local newspapers, the Straits Times, to ask me for give some advice to the small fish farmers. I use a very simple example. I say, big boys, they will not grow all the fish species. They only choose those popular, high demand. But consumers, they don't want to eat the same thing all the time. So the small fish farmer, they can grow something that the big boy are not growing, right? And also, with a lot of this innovation in terms of alternative fish feed, fish vaccine, all these things, but big boy have no time to test the efficiency, so they need a test bed. This small fish farmer can well be the test bed. So when you're working together, everybody is happy. Everybody win-win situation for everyone. So it's about the prepare to try new options and stay relevant in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there will be opportunities. Yeah.
Well, on that positive note, I wanted to say, we're just about out of time. So thank you very much for joining us, Professor Chen. It's a really interesting discussion and hearing about sort of the inefficiencies in the food system and where we can improve. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to find you?
My email. I can in my email reply, I can even give you my mobile number, so you can WhatsApp me or whatever. Right?
Okay, so we'll just include your links and things like that and how to contact you in the show notes for the podcast, and anybody who's interested can just reach out to you directly. This podcast is brought to you in partnership between Capacity Building International and the International Emergency Management Society. You can join teams today at tiems.info. That's tiems.info. And also sign up for the International Emergency Management newsletter by CBI at capacitybuildingint.com. Is there a topic you would like to hear about? Or are you a functional expert and want to be featured on our show? If so, reach out to us at info@capacitybuildingint.com and let us know. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.